He's the icon. He's the franchise of World Championship Wrestling. He's the man they call Sting! He did this, he did that. He was always cool with everyone and as quick as a cat. He looked fine, he looked cool, but man, his associates would always turn on him and make him look like a fool. No friendship would ever last because he would always give in to temptation and believe the best are within. He's the man called Sting. And for years and years, he was the flag bearer for World Championship Wrestling. When other wrestlers were bopping back and forth, Sting made sure to stay loyal to the company that was loyal to him. And from Surfer Sting to Crow Sting to the very last Nitro, all the great feuds that he had, he was truly somebody that you could depend on to always defend the company. But then, well, WCW went absolutely tits up for a variety of reasons I will not go into in this particular video. But when it comes to World Championship Wrestling, going back to the days of the NWA, there's Starrcade, the granddaddy of them all, the event that Vince McMahon basically ripped off to create WrestleMania. Sting was a big part of so many of those events. You know, some that, have matches that have been forgotten, and one in particular that should have been remembered for all the right reasons instead of all the wrong reasons. Steve Borden, the man they call Sting. What a goddamn career he had, not just in WCW, but afterwards as well. But I'm here to just talk about what he did on the show of shows. I'm John Redland with my real honest thoughts on Sting's Starrcade legacy. I did one about Flair. You can check that out if you want. This one isn't going to be as detailed as the Flair one because even though Flair missed a few, it's actually kind of sad that his last Starrcade match was against Eric Bischoff. No, really? Sting has had some memorable moments at Starrcade. So let's talk about, well, a little bit of the beginning. I mean, obviously you have to start at the beginning. When you get to the end, stop. So, after a brief stint in Memphis, where things, were booked weekly, very weekly, as Dutch Mantel would say, and they were very weak, him and Hellwig, later the Ultimate Warrior, they were the Blade Runners. They were a whole bunch of weird Road Warrior ripoff type things. But Sting, you could tell, had the attitude to learn. They were also freaking balloon animals with how roided up and insane they were. But they went to Mid-South, aka the UWF. Hellwig didn't last because he didn't like being told what to do because he thought he knew better. Yeah, you didn't know what to do in 2014, did you, Hellwig? I feel bad, but the man wished, that Bobby Heenan's cancer would take him and a whole bunch of other stuff. So, yeah, I really don't feel bad for Jim Hellwig. Fuck the Ultimate Warrior. I'm glad he's gone. So, UWF is where Sting basically got his big, big start, I guess you could say, like the building blocks. Because realistically, he actually got the big push in WCW, but Bill Watts took his time with him. There were others that helped him along, and Sting had the attitude to get better. And he did get better. And then Crockett bought Mid-South UWF after the Crockett Cup 87 was pretty much a flop. I don't know how many people they had in the Superdome, but it wasn't that many. And unfortunately, well, because of the oil bust in the Oklahoma, Texas area, and it might have even been in a few other states, people didn't have the disposable income. Mid-South Wrestling got sold, and Sting, as part of the UWF acquisition for $4 million by Jim Crockett. No wonder Bill Watts wanted to sell, because he found a sucker to buy his business that was fledgling. But Jim Crockett always made good business deals, except he fucking didn't. So, Sting would come over. He was, he was kind of just seen as like a guy. Like he had a cool look, the flat top and that kind of stuff. But he was a heel at first. He teamed with Jimmy Garvin and Michael Hayes against Eddie Gilbert, Larry Zbyszko, and Rick Steiner. At least I think he was supposed to be a heel here, but he got a big pop at Starrcade 87. There was a snake bit show that I could talk about. I've talked about in great detail actually between Survivor Series 87 and Starrcade 87. The whole point is he got a big reaction because of his flashy, style, and he actually did I believe he did a really cool dive to the outside. They were in Chicago, though. They were in Greensboro. Wasn't as well received. Vince, kind of held his foot on their back and everything, kept him down, and they couldn't get a lot of buys for Starrcade 87 because he basically threatened the cable companies, which he would have just been cutting off his nose to spite his face. But that being said, Sting, as part of this six-man, it was a nice introduction, and seeing the flashy athletic style, yes, that carries us to a little sidetrack. Clash of Champions 1, where Flair made him. 45-minute classic. I remember that was playing on a live stream that they did on WCW YouTube channel, WWE put up, which is a great channel, I have to say. And that was a magnificent match. That was proof right there that Sting was going to be a guy to keep his eye on, or keep your eye on. And then he was, going for competing for titles. He would team up with Dusty Rhodes against the recently heel Road Warriors that nobody wanted to boo. Bad idea from Dusty to have the spike in the eye that led to his dismissal as a booker. But that was at Starrcade 88. That was when they took it away from Thanksgiving and moved it to the day after Christmas. They were in the Norfolk Scope, I believe. And that was a tag title match that ended via disqualification when I believe Ellering interfered. And hot crowd, don't get me wrong, hot crowd. But Dusty, that would actually be Dusty's last appearance in a wrestling capacity at Starrcade. No, really. I mean, to be honest, he was in his mid-40s at that point anyway. So then, we go to the Future Shock tournament that Sting, took part in. It was an Iron Man tournament. There was a singles tournament with 4. And there was a tag team tournament with 4. He faced off against Lex Luger. That was a loss. He faced off against Great Muta, that he had faced off over the TV championship. Had a great series of matches. Faced off at Halloween Havoc, teaming up with Flair against Funk and Muta. Where Ole Anderson was on the side of Flair and Sting. Gary Hart was on the side of Funk and Muta as the designated Terminators. Bruno Sammartino was the referee, and that's when Muta had to get up there and put out the fire with his mist. And the crowd popped, because how could you not pop for somebody to look cool like Muta? Muta got beaten, and Flair got beaten in the finals because of the goofy point system that nobody really could fucking follow. Even though they tried to simplify it, see, they did better in the G1, or that was a one-night tournament. Let's just say the G1 had a better point system, easier to figure out if you were analytic heavy. So Sting would then join the Horsemen. That would not last, and then we would go through 1990 where he had the knee injury just before Wrestle War 90. He would beat Flair for the World Championship at Great American Bash 90 in Baltimore, and then would have the feud with Black Scorpion, because that's exactly what we needed to see. Various people played the Black Scorpion, including Al Perez and a lot of wrestlers. In fact, I would recommend Googling it. You may be surprised by who played the Black Scorpion. Ole Anderson voiced the Black Scorpion. Ironic, given how he apparently hated a lot of minorities, that he would voice someone that had black on him. But he faced up against the Black Scorpion. That was Ric Flair. And even though Ric tried to wrestle a different style, you couldn't hide that chin. You couldn't hide the mannerisms. And even the stance. Even though he tried to be different, he was all in a bodysuit. But again, the chin. Came down in a spaceship for some reason. And this was it was a steel cage match. It was title versus mask. Black Scorpion lost. He was unmasked after a big old fracas. But then Flair would win the title back a little bit later. I think like just a couple weeks later. Very early 1991. So thus would end Sting's WCW title win. Or title run, the first time. And then through 91, he would have the U.S. Championship. He would face off against Rick Rude in the lead up to a Clash of Champions in November 91. He was also part of the Chamber of Horrors match. I hate it. How dare you, Dusty? How fucking dare you? But Abdullah the Butcher was his tag team partner in the Queeful Lottery, and I'm calling it that because the Lethal Lottery system and concept, WCW could never pull it off. Outside of maybe 5-6 matches out of the entire time they did that, they could never pull it off. And they tried it multiple goddamn times. Most of the matches were just random people put together, faces, heels, rivals, didn't matter. But Sting had been feuding with Abdullah the Butcher off and on, what was left of him at that point. And they took on Brian Pillman and Bobby Eaton. Pillman, who was still a babyface here. Bobby Eaton, who was collecting a check from WCW, and rest in peace, Bobby Eaton. I'm glad he got a healthy paycheck, but God, I wish they would have utilized him better. But Sting and Abdullah shockingly won the match. That's despite the fact that Abdullah was basically just upset at Sting and attacking him. And then the Battle Bowl, we get the 2-ring battles bowl concept. Yeah, that's fine. Let's just go with the Rumble, but let's make it 2 rings. That's going back to San Francisco. At least San Francisco, LA might have done it. And WCW done it in the past too. And it's not like they were the only promotions. I don't think AWA did it. Crockett might have done it. There were a lot of 2-ring, battle royals have been happening for a while. The idea is you have to be dumped into ring number 2, and then if you were dumped over the top rope, you are eliminated. It comes down to Sting and Luger. Luger had, they've always been friends, by the way. But this is when Luger was a heel. He had turned heel at Great American Bash 91, so he's a champion, face off against Ron Simmons. They made that feud about race. I don't think that was a good idea. I think Flair was booking at that point. Flair or Dusty. No, Flair wasn't booking. Would have been Dusty. Or Ole. Good Lord. It was somebody. Because Flair was gone by Great American Bash 91. So Sting ends up eliminating Luger. And thus would go Super Bowl 2, where Sting would win the world title. He'd feud with Vader, lose at Great American Bash 92, be part of a great War Games match just before that. And we build up to this, where he even faced up against Jake Snake Roberts at Halloween Havoc 92 in the Coal Miner's Glove on a pole match. And oh boy. But then he faced up against Vader in, personally, my favorite match that Sting ever has. Starrcade, King of Cable. They always had great matches. And JR and Ventura were on fire here doing this. Sting made sure that Vader punched himself out. It was great shit. They always worked well together. Rest in peace, Vader. And Race was a great, Harley Race was a great manager for Vader. He really did compliment him well. And this was a spectacular match. Great big man, medium-sized man. Because Sting was a big guy. But it was still just really fucking impressive to see. And then we get to 1993, which was less impressive to see because we saw a lot of it. He teamed up with Road Warrior Animal because Hawk was over teaming with Kensuke Sasaki in New Japan and making him Power Warrior. So Road Warrior Animal was over here, and they teamed up against the Nasty Boys in a tag title match that ended in a DQ. After 30 minutes. Let me repeat that. It is a tag title match that ended after 30 minutes in a DQ. Yeah. Not the last time that we would have a lengthy tag match that would absolutely go nowhere in WCW history. I believe they had the street fight where it was Sting and Booker T against the Road Warriors at Uncensored 96. That went a while. The whole thing is that yes, it was cool to see Sting and Animal team up, but come on. Come on. Just no. Just goddamn no. So yeah, that was a bit of a downturn. And then we got to 94. Mind you, Sting had been taking a step back. He'd been, once Hogan came in, Sting had beaten Vader for the title after Rick Rude suffered the back injury at, I believe, in the Dome. Because of the elevated ramp area. And he would end up beating Vader. would lose a unification match to Flair. Flair would then lose to Hogan. That was the NWA, International Championship fiasco. That was a whole nother can of worms that would be very, very hard to decipher. I think I might have deciphered it on video at one point, but it's been a while. Now, we get to where Sting was at Halloween Havoc 94 trying to help Hogan beat Flair in retirement in a cage match. And then he got knocked out by somebody. Who did he get knocked out by? Oh no, it's a man that butchered the friendship. That's right. Brutus the Barber fucking Beefcake was seen as a great villain for Hogan because Hogan wanted to work with his friends. Brutus Beefcake. He got to main event Starrcade. You know who can get main event Starrcade here? That was Sting. Granted, Sting versus Avalanche. Bless John Tenta. I wish John Tenta was still here. Apparently a genuinely nice guy and a really good big man. But yeah, Sting faced up against Avalanche. Earthquake. Get it. Then he had to become a shark. Why didn't you just call him John Tenta? But that being said, for all the stuff about WWF being caught in the cartoonish era, look at a lot of WCW. They were just as cartoonish. They were doing some good stuff and some alternate stuff or alternative stuff, but come on. And by the way, it's a DQ finish after quite a bit of action. Not like after a few minutes. This was after quite a bit of action. And then 95, he's competing for the U.S. title. He's doing some good stuff. And then Flair is having problems with Arn and Pillman, so he gets Sting to join him. And then Flair gets attacked before the pay-per-view. And then Sting has to go out there and wrestle. And then Flair shows up and gets the tag and immediately attacks Sting because it's Ric Flair and Sting, you idiot. But then we get to, basically it's a triangle, lengthy match. It was a three-way, basically, after the WCW versus New Japan World Cup. Meaning the end would be 2 wrestlers, 1 World Cup. You're welcome. It's against Luger and Flair. The winner faces Randy Savage later on. The winner was not Sting. After nearly 30 minutes, that went a while. And you had to do tags to get out. And I sort of get it, but you really should have had a 4th person there. Because then it would have made a little more sense. It was just awkward. Yes, it was a way to give people a bit of a rest, but had it been 19 minutes, it would have been better. This was 29 to 30 minutes, and it dragged, and it felt it. And by the way, the finish was a count-out. Flair dumped both Luger and Sting out, and they got counted out. And then he beat Savage for the world title. And then One Man Gang won the U.S. title from Kensuke Sasaki in a dark match. One Man Gang was a champion in 1995. I know. I don't even think he can believe it either. So, then 96, he's teaming with Luger. Unlikely alliance. Because Luger's more of a heel, still in the Dungeon of Doom. Sting sees some good in him. Hostile takeover match. Sting basically gets screwed over along with WCW. Fall Brawl lead up. Fake Sting. Sting shows up during the War Games match. Is that good enough for you right there? Tells him to stick it. The only thing that's for sure about Sting is nothing's for sure. And he starts, dressing a little darker and everything and stuff like that. And involves the face paint and all that, the black and white. And lets everybody decide, or lets WCW kind of just twist in the wind because they turned their backs on him like some of the fans did. Now, I remember even at 15 years old thinking, well, that's kind of dumb. Like, why would Sting do that? That doesn't look like Sting. It looked close enough. Jeff Farmer, he looked close enough. But I remember taping Nitro at that point because I was still watching Raw live. And I remember seeing that and pausing. I'm like, that's not Sting. So by the time he saw the pay-per-view, which I saw at a buddy's house because his uncle would always order stuff, because he loved wrestling. In fact, until the Monday Night Wars were over, he would always order the pay-per-views. I just wasn't able to always go over there. But he missed 96, Sting did, because of the Crow era, that kind of stuff. But then we build up to Sting versus Hogan. Sting hadn't wrestled since Fall Brawl 96. He kept, going with, he kept, confronting the NWO, confronting WCW, threatening WCW guys to hit him, this kind of stuff. But then finally at Uncensored 97, Sting shows his true colors. That's why we love him. Lays out the goddamn NWO. Big fucking pop. I mean, good God. Somebody threw a drink at him, so I hope that person lost their arm in a terrible accident. But it's all building up to Sting versus Hogan. The most bought pay-per-view in WCW history. Starrcade 97. Sting just had to beat Hogan clean. He didn't beat him clean. They didn't even do the pass count. I've talked about this in numerous videos. I'm not going to get too much into detail. But Hogan wanted to fuck things up because that didn't work for him, brother. Sting didn't have a tan. Sting wasn't into this whole thing. If Sting had won in 10 minutes, even if they had done the fast count bullshit and Bret Hart had come out, I still don't think it would have been salvageable. He needed to beat him clean. And he didn't. So yeah, he won the world title after a restart and then lost it soon after when Hogan beat him in a disputed finish on Nitro. They was shown afterwards, and then the title was held up for for 2 months basically until Super Bowl '98, where Sting won it, and yeah, he got a good reaction, and he was cooled off by then. They fucked up their own goddamn business. Yes, they were still doing arguably great pay-per-view buys, and they made a lot of money in '98. Look what they were doing by the time we got to April '99. Spring Stampede 1999 was like 250,000 pay-per-view buys, and that was one of the last times they would hit 200,000. I think Road Wild 99 and Mayhem Mayhem 99, maybe Halloween Havoc. The whole point is they didn't have a lot of people tuning into this, and he missed 98, by the way, because he was in rehab. Because he realized he needed to stop living life in the fast lane. He, traded one addiction for another by giving his body to Christ. Whatever, Sting seems to be living in a good way, but I just always find it funny when people do that, but he seems to be doing well with it. And he came back in the spring, or the, early winter of '99. He then would bounce around a little bit and have not very good feuds. He would face Luger in a DQ match where Elizabeth may have seemed like she didn't want to be with Luger anymore, and he handed her a big old can of mace like she'd been using before. Special mace. And then she tried to mace him in the face with a silly string. Not the private party finish. And then Sting stupidly gets hit and gets laid out, gets his hand broken because Luger was doing that for some reason and beating people up and breaking their hands. And then that was it. That was Sting's last match because, yes, he was on the WCW Starrcade 2000 poster, and I took a look over that thing and was looking around, and yeah, they didn't put him on that. They didn't have him on the show. I mean, yeah, you could argue that Sting by that point couldn't have really salvaged the goddamn company, but to not have him on your biggest goddamn show, that's the end of Sting's legacy. Him facing his best friend or one of his best friends and losing stupidly because he has to look again like an idiot. So that's all I have to say. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of Sting's legacy? What do you feel Sting's best match in at Starrcade is? What do you feel is the worst match? And why is it the match with Hogan? So, yeah, agree, disagree with what I said. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Ritland, and until we meet again, happy trails to you.